Ladies and gentlemen, welcome along to another episode of EOTT, Everything on the Table, with me, Jimmy James. And I have another wonderful conversation to share with you again today, guys, with the one and only Ben Emlyn-Jones. Ben, how are you, brother?
Hello, Jimmy. I'm fine, my friend. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, brother. I really appreciate you taking the time to come and have a chat because for people who aren't familiar with Ben, I'm sure many of you will be, but for those who aren't, he's an alternative researcher, a novelist, and is a radio show host for, is it HPA, NWO, and Critical Mass Radio. Is that correct, Ben?
Yeah, Critical Mass Radio, unfortunately, is not in existence anymore. But
Okay.
HPA, I just pronounce it Hapanwo.
A
It,
panwo, okay.
it stands for Hospital Porters Against the New World Order. And
Brilliant.
like yourself, I've got my own sort of radio show, and I also have a YouTube channel, and I also write a blog, and I've written books such as this one, Roswell Rising, a Novel of Disclosure. That's one of my latest books.
Fantastic.
And yeah, I've got other books as well, but yeah, I mean, so I'm kind of like I use my multimedia outlet to cover so many different subjects, a whole array of different areas I go into. For instance, I'm very interested in the UFO subject. I'm interested in the paranormal, ghosts, government cover-ups, conspiracy theories, so-called, the esoteric, cryptozoology, ancient history, on forbidden history and archaeology, you know, the mysteries of the past, and things like that. So that's kind of my entire gamut, which covers an awful lot of things. And I really so I believe I tend to think they all tend to link together. I find that they are all associated in some way. So if I focus too much on one, I might miss some details for not focusing on the others. That's I kind of see it as a holistic issue to do with the whole world and how it works. And these things I consider, the list of subjects I just gave, are actually the most important issues affecting the human race and planet Earth today. And the hospital porter bits comes from the fact that I was a hospital porter.
Awesome. Well, I'd like to come on to that, Ben, if we may. So if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about yourself, and then I'll kind of, I've got a friend, Paul Devlin, who was working as a secondary paramedic, so not first line, but the ones who do all the deliveries and stuff, and he was telling me about his experience, quite shocking, but we'll come on to that in a little bit, if we may. Tell us a bit about your background then, Ben, and how you kind of grew up and how you got onto the path you're on, because we're never born into this stuff, are we, Ben? It always is a journey that kind of starts somewhere along the line.
It does seem that way. I mean, I'm a Welsh boy like you. I actually come from Lampeter in West Wales, and yes, I couldn't be Scottish with a name like Emlyn-Jones, could I? I come from Lampeter, and I lived there. It's a snod little place. It's actually a university town. It's probably the smallest university town in the world. It's only got about 3,000 people, and half of those are students. And then I moved to Oxford. I was sort of like you say, we're not born into this sort of thing, and yeah, I mean, I certainly wasn't a conspiracy nut, so called, when I was like a 5-year-old at school, starting school. But I don't know, somehow I don't recall a moment when I kind of was red-pilled or woke, or whatever the term you want to use. There was no real moment when that happened. And I've always been somewhat of an outsider, I suppose, and I'm sure some psychology will pick that term to pieces. But I had an interest in the paranormal and UFOs from a young age. I remember reading a book, and I've found another copy of it from when I was a kid, which my parents brought me, about UFOs. I remember being very interested in that. I also liked the TV series Project UFO. I was very into sci-fi, loved Star Trek, even from when I was like a preschool, on Doctor Who and things like that. And of course, there are lots of people who love those and are not into the things I'm into, but I think they were enormously influential on me. And I loved Star Wars and things like that. And then what happened? I suppose over the course of my life, I started to realize that there are a lot of these issues that I was looking into were in fact real. I don't think I maybe took them seriously enough when I was reading them as a kid, but these things were in fact real. And it slowly but surely, it came more and more into my life. Now, there are certain events that happened to me which certainly were extremely inspiring, often not in a good way, that made me, I think, more aware and more like who I am today. It was these kind of milestones along the road which had enormous effect on leading me to where I am now. And there's some obvious ones, 9/11, for example. I was already well on the road when 9/11 happened. I mean, I didn't see 9/11 happening and think, that's a conspiracy. I didn't think that. I was shocked and appalled as everyone else was at what had happened.
Did you have the feeling though, Ben, that I remember I was 16 and just watching it and just thinking, this is like watching a film. There was just this, and a lot of people say the same thing. There was just this overarching kind of just feeling of something's not right here. You know, it was just something next level, wasn't it?
Well, I don't think I felt that way at the time, even though I should have done, to be honest, because I'd already started reading. I'd already started reading David Icke and things like that. I was already getting into that when 9/11 happened. I'd already read about 3 or 4 David Icke books. But
the legend himself.
Yeah, he's very influential. I mean, not so much now, but at the beginning he was very influential on me.
I think that's fair to say. He was certainly influential for my beginning of my journey, and still continues to be. So I've got a lot of respect for David. But as you say, he's a good starter, isn't he? To get your kind of feet on the ground, he's a good start off.
Definitely. So when 9/11 happened, I was already reading David Icke. I was already interested in Alex Jones. I was watching Alex Jones it was Google Video in those days, not YouTube. I had several others. So I should have, I think, been more suspicious. I suppose I was just shocked. I mean, my first thought, because I was a hospital porter at the time, was I first thought, well, how are the hospitals in the area coping with all the injuries and the deaths and things like that?
Yeah.
You know, but then that was an enormous, very, very catastrophically catalyzing event. That's a quote from Project for a New American Century, for me as a person, and for lots of people. There are other events. I mean, funnily enough, a lot of the things that really, really had an influence on me were things that happened long after they actually did, and I was looking back on them. One of those was, I suppose, I was sent to some psychology. I was sent to a psychologist when I was a kid at school. I mean, I was sent to be examined because apparently, I can't remember. My dad won't talk about it now, but for some reason I was examined by psychologists when I was a child. I was sent to the educational psychologist. And then my mother, who was nobody special, as they say. I mean, she was kind of like a cinema usherette. But she decided to go to university when she was like in her 30s. And so she did. You could do that a lot easier in those days than you can now. You didn't have to take out loans and things. And she went off to university. She got a degree in psychology, and then she ended up training as a counselor. In fact, she worked as a counselor, marriage guidance and things like that, relationship counselling, for the rest of her working life after that. And it wasn't long because she fell ill, and the last 2 decades of her life she was very ill. But she came home from her training school in Rugby, where she was training as this counsellor, and she had this old lady with her, this rather strange old lady, a elderly Scottish lady. And I remember bringing her when she brought her in, and my mum was clearly very fond of this old lady. Isabel, her name was. And this was not someone who was on the faculty at the college. This was not one of my mother's teachers. This was not someone associated with my mother in any way. But somehow this woman had latched onto my mum, and she sort of became part of the family. I suppose she became kind of surrogate grandmother. She was there all the time. And I felt enormous unease, even though I was only like about 13 years old. I felt enormous unease at the presence of this old lady, even before from the very moment I saw her. I mean, very quickly that kind of became proved wrong, because she was a very, very unpleasant person. She was extremely unpleasant to me, not my brother, me. And she seemed to like enjoy ordering me about like a servant, and she'd say horrible things to me, just things designed to hurt me. She seems to know where my Achilles heel, so to speak, was. And then it was long after that. Actually, it was after, oh God, blimey, long after I'd grown up and I'd become an adult, and I was looking into mind control and things like that. That I suddenly learned who this lady was. This old lady Isabel, my surrogate grandmother. Her full name is Isabel Menzies Lythe. Now, just put it into Google. You'll be shocked, because she is one of the most infamous figures in the history of psychological warfare that the world has ever seen. She founded the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, which
really,
yes,
that's fascinating. Yeah,
she was involved in what was the Ministry of War. She started her career in what was the Ministry of War, became the Ministry of Defence when the Orwellian language kicked in. And
the old double speak.
Yeah, exactly. The Ministry of Peace. So, and then she ended up working in the National Health Service as well. But her crowning glory is the founding of this organization, which is like really totally a major fifth column psychological think tank, which is designed.
If you wouldn't mind, Ben, if you would be so kind, can you give us just a little bit of a brief insight of your knowledge of the Tavistock Institute? Because I'm aware of it, and I'm sure many people will be. But for those who aren't, just give us a little bit of an insight into what we're discussing here with regards to Tavistock and what it's about, please.
It's an organisation. If you look it up, it's called the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, which itself is a rather Orwellian name. If you actually read what its mission statement and things like that, a lot of people read it and say, "What's this about? What does it mean?" It's one of these strange things, and you see the same things with organisations such as Common Purpose. And what you'll find is
social engineering, essentially, isn't it?
Yeah, it's an independent organisation. It consults to other organisations, usually state or corporations and various charities and people like that. They hold meetings which are designed to, even the terminologies are. They say improve team building, and the buzzwords you often hear: improve teamwork, assess communities and things like that. For example, funny enough, they actually came along to the Occupy Wall Street, Occupy the City of London thing. Do you remember all those people set up tents outside St Paul's Cathedral? They went along to that, and they had this thing called they called it what was it called, social dreaming or something, and they held workshops in that group, among that group of people, and there were several people warning, don't let the Tavistock Institute into this place. So what they actually are is hard to define, but I know that they have an effect. I know that they are used. They're used by all kinds of institutions within the state, within the government, within National Health Service, Ministry of Defence, where they send people along and they just talk and they advise, and that in that way they kind of influence people's minds. They influence society, cultures, and individuals. They change the way we think and feel in various ways that even now I don't quite understand, and I've looked for examples. I mean, among the official publications, it's almost impossible to find. You probably need to know psychology to even understand it. But I have first-hand experience of what I think is probably one of their missions into my family, and why that is, I don't know. Maybe it's because I ticked some box or something when I was a little kid at school. I don't know. They decided to send someone to keep an eye on me and mess with my head. I mean, the worst thing is, you see, this changed my mother's mind. My mother's personality changed under the influence of Isabel, which was very upsetting. She ends up hating me, actually, and it's awful for a 13-year-old.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It's really, really horrible. She never really recovered from that, actually, and me and my mum really never had any close interaction again.
I'm really sorry to hear that, Ben. I really am. And I have been reading a book quite recently, The Art of Psychic Self-Defense by Dion Fortune. And there are a couple of little bits in there which are kind of resonating, because, as you say, there's so much more than we know, Ben. Psychology, I've been studying for a psychology degree, and I learned more extracurricularly researching parapsychology and all the rest of it, none of which is even mentioned. It's all this stuff by design. And you made an interesting point there about, perhaps there was some element or way in which you were targeted or chosen out. And we know the schools funnel people, but I think it's safe to say, and you might be able to back me up on this with regards to your hospital experience, I think we're kind of tagged from birth with regards to genetics and all these kind of things. People talk about the military industrial complex. We've got the military pharmaceutical complex, and this is just a human farm, essentially. And I think they do to us what they want to do to us. And I think there's a lot more monitoring that goes on than people realize, I think.
Yeah, there's a lot of it is undercover. I mean, we know that, for example, organizations such as GCHQ, the National Security Agency, for what they profess to do, what they say their mission is, compared to the number of people they employ and the number of resources they have, their budgets, for example, far more must be going on than what they're telling us. Far, far more. What are they doing with all that? And the information they gather from, you mentioned genetics and things like that, and from CCTV, and from educational assessments and things like that, and all these other, and indeed, I imagine the Tavistock Institute collects a lot of data itself. What are they doing with all that information? About me. I mean, maybe, there was something about, I think, so this is what means there was something about me from a young age that seemed to draw attention. As I said, even before Isabel came into our family, I was being sent to the child psychologist continuously. I don't know why. I mean, I didn't think I was a messed up child or anything like that.
You're probably questioning authority too much and things like that, Ben, you know,
perhaps that
asking
was
the right
it.
questions in school and all this kind of stuff,
Hmm.
possibly. Who knows?
Yeah, even from a very young age. Yeah, so there's no moment when I sort of woke up. It sort of came on slowly, but that kind of thing, even from back then, I think there was something odd about me. I was something odd. I didn't fit in.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you're not the only one, Ben. You know, it's
Mm.
7 billion of us, as they say, and this is why it's nice to share this information, because sometimes it can be very isolating, and a lot of the time for people, they don't realize that other people have had similar or same experiences, and then it's nice then for them to be able to relate and hopefully reach out. And as you say, we are just all learning and exploring together. So, yeah, how did you kind of progress from there then, Ben? What was the kind of, how did you get into kind of hospital work? Was that your first employment, or was it kind of progression?
I did several. I mean, see, I was hopeless at school. I mean, I was uneducatable, really. I mean, I couldn't wait to get out of school. I did, in terms of my professional life, I really didn't know what I wanted. I joined the Royal Navy and trained for a few months, which then I was basically kicked out over a fitness issue, which was which was sort of like quite, well, it's a bit embarrassing. But basically I was no good. It wasn't like I wasn't fit enough, so in a conventional sense, which they had a whole list of things I was no good. But it's a bit embarrassing. But anyway, I was very upset when that happened. But so I went back home and I didn't know what the hell I wanted to do in my life. And I did an odd job. I was looking after, you know, packing toys, and this guy was like making toys, and I put them in boxes for him, things like that. And then I did a job at the hospital, got into a rather horrible, a rather boring job at the hospital. I was actually like an office junior in some office, and I hated it. I loathed it. And then a few months later, I lasted that for about 3 months. And then I became a porter, and I got to know some of the porters, and I thought, yeah, I want to be a part of that. I want to be a hospital porter. So I did. I became a hospital porter, and I remained one for 23 years. And I loved it. It's something I was passionate about and enjoyed, and I felt I was doing something worthwhile. I mean, I learned all about big pharma and things like that, but you know, I managed to. I suppose I managed to separate those two, what you might call contradictory sentiments within myself. Which, I mean, I felt a bit guilty about that actually, but still, we all do that to a certain extent. We all
Of
keep
course
two
we do.
sets. We all keep two sets of books, and
Of course we do.
you know, it's inevitable. And I called when I started. All this time, I was becoming more and more conspiratorially aware. When I was looking up and reading more stuff about the paranormal, about UFOs, about the various government machinations and things like that. And I was always quite outspoken actually, and I did get on some people's nerves at my hospital. But then they sometimes got on my nerves. You know what I mean? I suppose I've always been quite intellectual in that sense, and that's always isolated me because I'm quite intellectual, but I'm also working class. I can't like mingle with the academics at the same time. I'm not content to sit around talking about football all day.
Same,
You know,
same.
maybe for
Yeah.
an hour or so. I don't mind. I don't mind football. I'm not anti-football, but it's just I'm not content to sort of like interact with my peers on that level.
I like stimulating conversation. You know?
Yeah,
Conversations
exactly. Yeah,
like these, where you just meeting new people, learning new stuff, and just sharing perspectives, really. But
exactly. Yeah.
yeah,
So I've always been a bit sort of, again, I felt quite isolated, but no, I mean, I've always been a social person. I had friends, being in portraiture, you know, there's a great sense, there's a great camaraderie in the
it's a very
hospital.
social job, isn't it? You know, between
Very,
the
yeah, and
and
you,
doctors, the nurses, and all the rest of it.
yeah, and you get the chance, and you also, your part of your job is, in a sense, the informal side of your job is counselling and looking after the patients and talking to them. You know, it's something, even though you're a porter and you're not giving them medical treatment, you can contribute to their healing enormously by the way you behave with them. And I've had some amazing conversations with people, absolutely extraordinary interactions with people, and I think that meant a lot to me.
Can you, if you wouldn't mind, Ben, obviously you said you were a reporter for 23 years. Would you be kind enough to give us a little bit of a commentary on, maybe degradation is not the right word to use, but how the kind of NHS has kind of, you've seen the dismantling and just the changes really that you saw from the beginning to how we are now, because it's kind of ramped up more recently, hasn't it? But it's going to be a long-term progressional thing, I think.
Yeah, there were a lot of changes that took place over the course of my time in there. My period of service covered some of the greatest changes in the National Health Service I've ever seen. and some of them were for the better, but mostly it was for the worst. I detected a steady degeneration in the service over time, a lack of, I mean, it's in terms of standards of conduct, for example, performance and conduct among the staff, those dropped. Acceptable standards dropped. I found that some new people coming in, they weren't being trained properly. They were allowed to get away with really what I would call really appalling behavior, you know, coming in late, going, you know, sneaking off early, a dereliction of duty and things like that. Really, really bad. Incompetence, I would say, incompetence and laziness on an enormous level. And I mean, I felt angry with those people, but at the same time, I realized that they were actually responding to how you know, the standards that were set by management in a normal way that most working class people do. You know, they often think to themselves, well, if I can get away with this, I will. You know, let's just see how much I can get away with, how little I can do here and still get paid. Because you're paid the same no matter what. Everyone's paid the same in the NHS no matter what. Whether you're an incompetent, if you're a lazy incompetent, whether you were a dedicated professional, paid exactly the same. Some of them felt it was a bit of a mug's game to try and do their job particularly well. So there's a little bit of a race to the bottom. And you get this in a lot of bureaucracies. You know, there's almost a resentment against anyone who tries to do better. It's almost like it breeds mediocrity. And indeed, sorry, my phone made a noise, but it is on do not disturb. Don't worry.
That's all right. I was just going to say, Ben, my friend Ben was working in the council, and you know, Ben's a consummate professional, customer service and this type of thing, and you know, whatever call came through, just different inquiries, he would do his utmost and his best. And one of the other guys was been there a little while. Was, why did you put so much effort in? You know, you don't have to do all that work, don't you? And he's like, well, that's what I get paid for, mate. This is what I come to work for. So this attitude is prevalent throughout, you know, a few of the industries, especially. Like
it is in many places. Yeah, I mean, and the larger the organisation, the more likely it is to be. And this was, I thought this was just a portering thing. It's not. This degeneration of the service could be seen across the board within medicine, nursing, everywhere. I mean, I noticed that the nurses were getting younger. They weren't staying around long enough. Basically, they weren't, for all the things they had to put up with, the blood and guts and the stress and the wiping people's bottoms and things like that. They're not paid enough. I mean, no one in the NHS is paid enough, actually. The people who do the frontline work, none of them are paid enough.
Oh,
so
they
were leaving. They were just leaving. They were just, I don't know if your friend who's an ambulance transport, he's on ambulance transport, I don't know if he feels the same way. But
he's
people
not in it anymore, but yeah, I was speaking with Paul and getting into the depths of it. It's quite a good story, actually, and it's just very revelatory.
A lot of people got fed up with it, and people were leaving left, right, and centre. I mean, I don't think I would have left willingly. I started one of the websites on my blog. One of the blog sites I've got is actually called HPWA, Hospital Porters Welfare Association, which is actually not an official organisation. It's just what I decided to call the blog. I'm hoping other people could get involved, but only no one ever did. But I record. I mean, I keep a note, even in my post-portering life. I keep a note of everything that's going on there, and I'm still taking interest. And it got to the point where there was really some travesty and really awful things were happening. I mean, there was recently we had a nurse called Sarah Kitai who actually she's a devout Christian, and she said she'd pray for one of her patients, and she was sacked. Now she's experienced intensive care unit. She's reached sister grade in the intensive care unit. So obviously she's a very senior nurse. They dropped her without hesitation. They got rid of her without hesitation for what I would consider something completely harmless. And there's other similar situations like that. And my own dismissal, I think, was very suspicious. It's a long story, but I attended a conference in Swindon in 2011, and I did a couple of interviews with some newspapers. I got back to work, and literally within less than 2 weeks, I was suspended, which is really very strange, because it's, you know, one of my jobs, I was actually involved in training and things like that when I was a porter. So I had to learn how to fill out risk assessment forms and things like that, and incident forms. And I knew how many incident forms they get. I mean, they get up to 30,000 per month, incident reports and adverse incident reports and complaints and things like that within the trust. It's a huge amount, it's about 1,000 a day. And and I knew it takes a long time for them to get back to you. It's how long it takes them to get back to you depends on the priority, the priority level of the actual complaint. And the complaint made against me was very low priority in terms of in terms of risk assessment, in terms of likelihood and outcome, possible outcome. So the fact that it was fast tracked was itself very suspicious. I was basically dragged in front of a kangaroo court, and they said that some of the material on my website was offensive, inappropriate, unprofessional, and might bring the hospital into disrepute. And they they didn't tell me straight away. They suspended me and didn't say a word. First of all, they didn't say a word for a week. And I was like, I phoned up my shot steward the next day, and I says, Abdul, I says, I was suspended last night when I came on duty. And he says, what for? And he says, I don't know. I said, I don't know. He says, what do you mean you don't know? Did they say anything? I said, no. So it looks like it. And then when I went to the disciplinary, I got the distinct impression there was a lot going on that they weren't telling me. A lot had been going on, and I felt I was being steamrolled out the door. And to tell you the full story would take 3 hours or so. But
well, we can do that another time by all means, Ben. It sounds like shenanigans, my friend. And
I wasn't the only one. You see, there was other people. There was like Miles Johnston, who was. I think you probably heard of Miles Johnston.
I'm familiar with Miles. Yeah, I've met Miles.
Something similar happened to him at the BBC, and also Kevin Annett, who was actually a clergyman from Canada. He was actually a vicar of the local church. Same thing again. And with him, it was definitely, he's described it in his book, because he was finding bones in these old residential schools where they've been educating the children from the remote Indian tribes.
Yes, I chatted with John Wedger the other night. I think this came up then. I'm sure it was John I was chatting with. It's just woe betide anyone who tries to shine a light.
Yeah, and it was embarrassing because these were church-run schools, and he was obviously shining a light on a dirty corner they didn't want exposed. So the same thing happened to him. There's a guy called Gary Heseltine. He's a ufologist. He got into trouble. He was a policeman, and he got into trouble in the police force. So it seemed a lot of people were being attacked through their professional life who were interested in subjects like these. And it just seems
yeah, sorry, Ben. I was just going to say, it seems, I was chatting with Neil Berry the other night, and we were talking about you can judge a country by the way it treats its whistleblowers. And that's all we're seeing now. Are you familiar with Carol Woods and her situation?
No.
Carol Woods is currently now under section, no warrant, she's been up against it for quite a while. Social services whistleblowing up north. Just shenanigans. She's not the only one, and we are trying to kind of shine a light on it because this is the tool they have at their disposal. And if you really do shine a light on something, it's off you go, and it's a disappearance into the dark abyss of the mental health services.
Yeah.
It's just what it is. It's what I found and what we're seeing live on the ground. Do you know much about all this? I'm sure you do. Obviously, you've seen
mental health services. I mean, I've known people this has happened to. It's worse than prison. I mean, prisons are easier to get out of. You know when you're going, more or less when you're going to be let out, and you have more rights. No, a lot of people are like treated like in the mental health system. I mean, I myself was kind of sucked into it as a kid, and I thought, so I've never actually been diagnosed with a real illness of such, but I kept having to see bloody psychologists, and I don't know. I mean. I kept wondering if I'd stayed in the hospital, what would have happened? I mean, how much longer would they have tolerated me? Something like that happened to me, that's like...
Yeah, this is it. But it's live, it's real, it's what's going on the ground. So this is, again, other stuff that we're trying to shine a light on, because Carol Woods is one of the most coherent, intelligent women you'll ever speak to. And it's just disgusting what they do.
I'll check her out, because I'm surprised I've not heard of her. I've heard of Melanie Shaw, for example.
Melanie Shaw we mentioned. There's Carol Woods, who's currently, I'm hoping to speak with Carol soon, have a little conversation just to, shine a bit of light on the situation. And then Peter Forscher, you heard that name?
No.
Yeah, there's another guy chased across Europe, has now been sectioned for life in Austria by a psychiatrist who apparently, I think the expression is they have wood on him. They've got some dirt on him, and he signs off sections to order political dissidents and all the rest of it. So. Oh,
I see. So they obviously work that way. For the system works through that. Sets people up so they can control you through various ways.
This is it. Well, we'll leave all that aside because it's a bit of a grim one, that. But what I would love to chat about, because it's
such a broad and interesting field, and I now feel like we are coming to a point where we're either going to see this Project Bluebeam come into fruition. I think are we almost there yet, Ben? What do you think?
Well, yeah, Project Bluebeam is really interesting because I mean I've heard about it, and obviously it's never been proved to exist. However, what it's actually what it seems to be is perfectly feasible. That is to project a realistic three-dimensional image into the sky. Now, that can be done. It's not a secret. I mean, I saw it done at Thorpe Park.
Yeah.
In this case, it was actually a dancer dancing on a stage who was quite clearly not real, but was a three-dimensional image. This was done with simply with a laser projector, and you need some kind of medium like a cloud of smoke or steam, and you can produce a very realistic image in the air, and it's really quite uncanny to watch. But this was actually it's perfectly open, this kind of technology. It's got a lot more sophisticated since I went to Thorpe Park. But if for example someone wanted to project some kind of image into the sky, it could be UFOs, like we might think we've got an alien invasion. It could be something kind of something that a religious person would know, a Christian or Muslim might recognize as the second coming, or something else. But it's a way, I think, of creating the pretext for a complete state clampdown on society, because they're looking for that. I mean, they've already used various means of doing it in a kind of slow, more strategic sense. But if it was an emergency, if it came to it, and they wanted to go double or quits, they would use something like Project Bluebeam. There's a lot of talk about it happening at the 2012 Olympics. An alien invasion, now either real or fake, would happen at the 2012 Olympics in London. Ian R. Crane was talking about this. Rick Clay, he died actually. Rick Clay, this young chap who was talking about that, and it was so, I think so many people were expecting it though. I think it's possible they were going to do it and decided not to. They decided to abort the operation, which is good. But they could try something like that again if they're desperate, and they could try something like that again.
Yeah, this is it. I came across it a few years back, and to someone who doesn't have a great deal of knowledge about it, it could sound quite outlandish. But when you look, the patents are all there, the technology's there, they're using it in other kind of fields, is it entertainment and all this kind of stuff. So it's all there. I think it just gets to a point where you have the issue of gematria and everything's numbers and it's all encoded, and some people have been able to predict false flags and things like that, but it seems to be that when they actually predict them, then they have to kind of cancel them and all this kind of stuff. So it does seem to be now that in the age of information, there's so many people just burrowing away, finding all this information and bringing it to the table, that we've been behind the curve up until this point, but it does seem to be that we're kind of we're catching up with them, and that's never to overestimate or underestimate anyone or anything, because as we say, they're always outnumbered but never outgunned. That's what I like to say. And,
that's the problem, isn't it? Yeah, but I do feel quite optimistic about what's happening.
As do I.
The number of people like ourselves. I mean, we're becoming more and more in number and more higher profile. And I did a talk about this actually at the conference I've just been to, the Probe conference in St. Anne's, and I was doing it. I did a talk called "Is There Any Hope?" And the answer is obviously yes. And one of the reasons is because of the increasing awareness of this sort of thing. The fact that if they were planning some kind of false flag attack, alien invasion or something else at the London Olympics, and they stopped because it seemed very likely something was going to happen there, they stopped because of us, because we made them stop. Because if they tried it out, it'd just be too obvious. And indeed, that's happened since. I mean, the death of Jeffrey Epstein, for example. It's like when I heard it had happened, I just shrugged, because I knew that was going to happen.
Yeah.
He was going to be found apparently hanged in his cell, and many people were saying that would happen. They said this guy's never going to go to trial. It'll be like the trial of O.J. Simpson all over again, and too many names will come out. Too many powerful people have too much to lose. They will make it look a suicide, or report it as a suicide and kill him. And then they know that not most people won't believe him. They know that by doing this, it'll actually be something of a wake-up call for many people. However, they decided that it's just too dodgy. There's just too much to lose by not killing him, so they decided to kill him. It was the lesser of two evils from their point of view, and it's that sort of thing won't work for much longer. And there's too many people online, too many people looking at the kind of videos and things that we do. A lot of them are not as outspoken as we are. For example, there's been some opinion polls about conspiratorial belief. Up to, I think, 20% of people believe that the government is lying about UFOs. 15 to 18% think the government had something to do with 9/11 in various different ways, depending on how you word the question. 52% don't buy the official story of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. That's the majority of Americans don't believe the official story the government's telling about the death of one of their presidents.
I feel like now we're getting to the point, Ben, where the awareness is raising massively, and people are starting to kind of open their eyes and have a look and coming to accept certain things that we've kind of come to the common consensus, which are true. But we're still very much disjointed, divided, and we've not really got much cohesion on the ground, which is what we're trying to do with the podcast, is put all the different kind of fields of information out there, kind of bring people together so that they can get a bit more of an understanding. But also we're kind of really trying to promote community groups and stuff as well, you know. So in Swindon, we've got a couple of groups, the Mind, Body, Spirit group, the Rabbit Hole. We meet up, I think the Mind, Body, Spirit group meets up every Tuesday, the Rabbit Hole every second and fourth Thursday, because, you know, we're talking about states of national emergency or any of these kind of things. If communications go down and there's no, you know, mobile phones, no internet and all the rest of it, what are people going to do? They're all just going to be flailing and panicking in their own houses. Whereas if we've got more community cohesion on the go, then at least if anything does come afoot, then people can get together on the ground. The internet's fantastic. I love it. It's an amazing tool, but it is also a double-edged sword, I think.
Yeah. Well, what the internet's done is it's opened up the world of information to people, but the information is confusing, and a lot of it's nonsense. I mean, the term fake news is bandied around, it's tossed around like a sweetie, but basically there's real fake news out there. A lot of it's from the official news stories, and it's that, in a sense, has created a new problem. It's not a lack of information, it's an overabundance of information, which has created a signal-to-noise ratio problem. There's so much rubbish out there that sometimes the real stuff is hidden, and some of the rubbish can be dressed up as alternative, and that's the problem. The opinion poll I just talked about, this American opinion poll, is encouraging. I mean, you and I obviously, people like us, are obviously a small vocal tip of a huge silent iceberg, and really, I think the key thing is getting the rest of the iceberg to speak. The people who answered yes in those opinion polls to actually take action on their knowledge. I mean, that's the challenge. Rather than education, it's inspiring those people to take action. Local groups and offline activities is a good way of doing that. The conference I went to, I think, is a very good way of doing that sort of thing. I used to help run a group here where I live called Berkshire and Oxfordshire Seeking Solutions, which unfortunately it has collapsed now, but for a while it was very active. And there are people in the local area I do meet up with occasionally, and whether it may be worth maybe reconvening that group or starting a new one, that's not a bad idea. And if you can do that, if there's more than one person, technically that's all you need.
Yeah.
But either way, you know, I mean, I've got some friends actually who they make flyers and posters and for lampposts and things like that, and they put flyers in people's doors. I mean, that's another good thing you can do. But every little bit helps. It all helps to raise that awareness to maybe a critical mass. It could be like the 100th monkey, you know, that we always hear about.
This is it. Yeah, I think Dr. Wong was talking it in terms of we only really need, I think he said 21% or 22% of people to actually get to that critical mass. That will be enough to shift the overall perspective, which would be a nice thought. But as you say, disinformation is so much now. Max Egan and I were discussing the deep fake and all the rest of it. We are at a point now where it's hard to know what to trust. There's so much out there, all this deep fake videos, deep fake audio. I think the thing that I rely on is just the stream of consciousness communications between individuals where, you know, we just share perspectives and evolve our perspectives to kind of keep up to date with what's going on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, I was quite shocked that the deep fake voice synthesizers and things like that are really quite astonishingly real. I mean, like the not Jordan Peterson one, which was actually shut down after they were threatened with a lawsuit by the real Dr. Jordan Peterson, because they said it sounded so like him. He was worried that people would like do mock interviews and make him sort of say things he didn't say and things like that. That can be done with anyone.
Yeah.
And in terms of disinformation, I mean, there's people who turn up within our own community who might be spreading false information. Sometimes they have personal motives. Sometimes they have something more sinister. I mean, there's individuals who become quite well known in the UFO field, for example, who quite clearly are there to generate discord and confusion. And once those, what I'd say is, if you identify those people, you have to keep away from them. You have to keep them away. You have to basically challenge them on their ideas. And that's what I try to do. I try to strike a balance between outright paranoia, and because I mean, this did come up in my talk actually at the weekend. It's almost like I said, hands up everyone who's been accused of being a shill, and like hands shot up everywhere. Yeah, the moment you develop a profile online, somebody somewhere will say that you yourself are a government agent, and the evidence they bring to light is often spurious and non-existent.
Always seems to be the way. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I used to be a part of a radio group of people doing a radio show. It was actually broadcast in Liverpool, and it was accused of being a front for MI5.
That's what I'm hearing these days, Ben, is everyone's a state asset. It's like, we just have to speak to someone. At the end of the day, you and I can speak, and if there's something that you're saying that doesn't gel with me, I'll say, oh, well, hang on a minute, Ben, let's explore this a little bit further. And I'm no doubt you and I will have an ongoing narrative, and we'll keep coming back and chatting. But the minute people aren't willing to come and have a chat and start hiding in the corners, this is when you have to question their motives, then, I think, isn't it?
I think so, yeah. I mean, it's sad because a lot of good people get sucked into this. The radio show I was referring to was called an MI5 Front, and the evidence was, well, someone said it was an MI5 front because they designed their website to look little bit like this person's. They use the same font and things like that. Therefore, it's an MI5 front. It's absurd. It's ludicrous. Yeah. You know, and very often when these accusations break out, it's always online, isn't it? It's always online.
Exactly.
You know,
yeah.
You could scroll up the angry Facebook comments, and you can find the source of it, and it goes back simply to maybe a disagreement over a factual issue or just a personal dislike. That's where it all comes from, and that I think that upsets me when that happens, because there's far more important things we have to deal with in this world than settling personal scores and calling other people agents of the government when there's no evidence. So I'm trying to strike a balance between caution and paranoia, and I think a lot of people maybe go too far the wrong way. And so I challenge that as well. I think it's important to be balanced.
I think that's fair to say, Ben. Yeah, I mean, I've chatted to a couple of people who have been under the cosh. Trolling is such it's an industry now, so it seems. I saw a post earlier. Forgive me, I can't remember the specific details, but I think it was the army recruiting for guys. It was worded a little bit differently to that, but essentially it seemed like trolls. They were recruiting for trolls to run these little they're just little contact centers, little call centers full of people just promoting Discord and getting paid for the fun of it. It's quite easy now, though, to I find anyway, personally, you can scope them out online. You can tell straight away, unless they've got a good amount of mutual friends, and even then it's not always a guarantee of it not being a troll. And there's a little page called Shadow Hunters who they take the time to seek them out and shine a light on them to show who these people are. So, there's good people doing good stuff as well at the same time, which is nice, because I know you're very much into the UFO stuff. And excuse me, I think my friend James Cushion Pillow, we call him, back in the day, introduced me to a few bits and bobs. And there's such a wealth, but as you say, the disinformation within that is hard to know. What's been your journey through your beginning? Have you ever had any first-hand experience with any craft or anything like that?
I've seen several things in the sky that I can't explain. Now, this isn't how I got into UFOs. But I suppose it's after that I started looking at the sky seriously. Most people look at the sky. Of course, anyone who looks at the sky for any serious amount of time will eventually see an unidentified flying object. And it's something up there they can't explain, and it could be an astronomical phenomenon like a meteor. It could be an unusual kite. That's very often causes lots of UFOs, balloons and things like that. Even the planet Venus has actually been, people have reported UFOs for that. Chinese lanterns, of course, less so now because people are used to them. When they first emerged, there was a big, huge amount of UFO reports from that. Now, I think there's a few though, I would say, that I've seen which really defy explanation. And one of those is, like, for example, I saw a white spherical object in the sky over Oxford in December 2008, and it was peculiar because it was a windy day, and this thing was completely stationary. Because my first thought it was a balloon, but it wasn't moving; it was just staying still. Now, balloons don't do that. Balloons actually use the wind to blow themselves along like sailing ships. And I just stared at it for a while. Then the cloud went in front of it. And when the cloud went in front of it, it gave me kind of like it was giving me a good range on it, at least a minimum range. And I could see it was obviously of some considerable size. When the cloud went away, the thing had gone. But it was a very, very odd experience. And I was already into UFOs then, so I knew immediately. I filled out a report. I sent it off, and I sent it to the Birmingham UFO group. I sent it to Nick Pope's UFO desk as well. Though Nick Pope wasn't running it then. So it's in the actual archives. You can actually get hold of my sighting. Yeah, it's more common. These sort of things are more common than most people think. UFOs are as real as the aircraft that fly over our heads, as the Right Honourable Paul Hellyer said. He was Minister of Defence for Canada.
I saw his, yeah. I saw a little white ball myself, Ben, as a young man, 16, middle of the night. Just above, I live from the valleys, just above the mountain, too high from the peak of the mountain to be anything attached to it, like a crane or anything like that. And it just started bouncing around, like moving unexplainably. And who knows, you know? I often tend to think any kind of unidentified craft, generally probably military or black projects. But when you've got balls of light moving, you know, unexplainable kind of trajectories and that kind of thing, who knows? I just keep open to it, you know.
There could be. I mean, some UFOs indeed are some kind of secret craft, some kind of secret military craft. I mean, indeed, like the stealth fighter, of course, has been seen, and people say, "Oh, there's a strange, weird thing." When before it was admittedly,
Funny you should say, Ben. One flew over the other night. My friends and I, Imran, were outside, and it was just almost silent, not quite silent, but almost silent. It was the triangular, I think it was the B-52, and just what a sight to behold. I think,
strange looking thing, isn't it? Big wedge-shaped
wings.
Really was. Yeah. And of course, that was actually flying for a decade before it was officially announced to exist. So, of course, some people might see that and think, "Oh, well, goodness me, that's not made on this earth," and it's an understandable mistake.
Yeah.
You know, but obviously, like. That doesn't. Some people claim that actually explains the entire phenomenon of UFOs. It doesn't. It explains some of it. Some of them are definitely not. I think made by humans, and they appear. They obviously are here on Earth, but they're not our own creations, which means we are sharing this planet with another intelligence, and non-human intelligence. There's no doubt about it.
I think if you do enough research, you can't but come to this conclusion. It seems, you know. Even from ancient stuff to new stuff, and you know, I follow people like Wes Penry, investigative journalist, been doing it for 20 years. We've only got a limited amount of information. All the rest of it's hidden in the Vatican or whatever. So with the current information we've got, and I know there's always new stuff coming up every day, don't get me wrong, but we do have a kind of foundational of information from the history and all the rest of it, and that's all we've really got to work with. And it does seem to be that, you know, the evidence is there, or at the very least, it's very strongly pointing towards the possibility of it.
I think it is a certainty. I mean, there are of course there are people who say it's not true, and they come up with, but it's clearly they have a very, very dedicated belief system. They come up with some really convoluted fake logic to actually maintain it.
Yeah.
You know, for example, Ian Ridpath, who said that. Well, the Rendlesham Forest incident was just a lighthouse flicking through. They could see a lighthouse shining through the woods, and that's what they saw. All these trains, Air Force security police, well, they were fooled by a lighthouse.
Already,
it's insane. It's bizarre that people come up with this, and there's even really even stranger ones. You know, like the joyriding ice cream van of Capel Green. It's literally some young thug stole an ice cream van and drove it in a nearby field, going up and down a nearby field with the lights flashing and the music playing, and these soldiers actually saw that and thought it was aliens. But of course, that is unfortunate. There were a few people like that, fewer in number now, because it really is getting harder and harder. It's a self-delusion that's now impossible really to maintain for any degree, without really, really dedicated self-blinkering. So I think the UFO skeptics are getting fewer in number. And people like Philip Klass, who was like a generation ago, was like the big UFO skeptic guy. There's no one actually in the world, I would say, occupies that role, because
they're too up against it now, aren't they, Ben?
Yeah, even within his lifetime, actually, Philip Klass started sounding so stupid that people stopped putting him on TV. So I think it is a certainty, and we've recently had a distinct change in the way UFOs are portrayed in the media. It's really, really quite remarkable. It happened very suddenly in December 2017 with the announcement from the To the Stars Academy that they had footage from the Department of Defense in the United States of strange objects at sea filmed by US Navy pilots.
Is that the one where the guys land? Well, I've seen one video where the guy's landing on an aircraft carrier, and to the right, he's obviously got a GoPro or something, and there's just some kind of triangular craft on the aircraft carrier. And again, it may be doctored, it may be fake. It didn't look fake, but well, I've never seen anything like that before. A little triangular looking thing.
That's not the one I mean. The one I mean is like you see like it's an infrared image actually. It looks black and white, and so you can't actually see what the real colors are. The thing was described as being white in color, but it's actually black in this material because it's infrared. But it's actually like a kind of capsule-shaped object just hovering above the sea, traveling very fast across the surface of the sea. There's actually another wedge where there's something just below the surface of the water, which is like causing the pilots you could hear them on the radio exclaiming at what they were seeing. There's been 3 of these now so far detected, and they've been released. Now, for a while we didn't know whether they were real or not. There was a lot of doubt over, where do they come from, because they were published by a group called the To the Stars Academy, which is a private independent group. It's not a government agency. It's actually applying for government funding at the moment, interestingly. Then the U.S. Department of Defense actually admitted, firstly, that the organization ATIP, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, that had existed the way the witnesses said it had, and that the material, the videos, were actually real. They're actually real. They were actually real publication. Now they were leaked. It wasn't a public release. These things were not intended to be published, but they had been published somehow. Maybe someone on the inside working to rule, someone on our side. Or maybe it's simply an accident, because these were not classified. This was not classified material. So it may be an accident. But either way,
these things do happen. They've seen the go on, sorry.
So I was going to say, either way, it's strangely enough, there was the usual tactics for dealing with this were not employed in this case. The usual what the government would have done previously was they would firstly deny. They would disavow all knowledge or association with this footage, and they would probably put out disinformation. Somebody saying they'd faked it or something like that. Some wide-eyed gimp sitting in a at a farmer's gate, going, oh yeah, I used my little computer to fake that, and I put it out, seeing if any. That's the usual thing they do. But they didn't do it this time, so why not? Jimmy, it just seems there's a change in strategy, which is very interesting.
That is very interesting indeed. The Into the Stars, is that the Tom DeLonge outfit? Yeah, I saw his interview on Joe Rogan. He wasn't very forthcoming. He had a lot to say.
No.
I reserve judgment. I'm not too sure what the situation is there, but.
It doesn't help actually that TTSA itself is an organisation with its own secrets and its own agenda for disclosure. Its own disclosure of its own material. It appears that they are holding a lot back, and including some information about some of the people involved, because some of the people involved are people I really consider quite shady. Hal Puthoff. You see, Hal Puthoff was the man who brought Uri Geller to the world, because Uri Geller was originally part of an experiment at the Stanford Research Institute into remote viewing, because during the Cold War this was messed around with for a while. Apparently nothing was found, but I think it went based on what Geller has told us, it actually became a black budget operation. He has formally confessed that he was a remote viewer for the CIA and Mossad, and that he of course he had a showbiz career as well, which is still going on, but that was just like a sideline,
little front.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with Justin Danneman?
No.
Oh, I watched a fantastic interview with him the other night. He was breaking down the leaked CIA documents with Sarah Westall. So I've had a little chat with him the other night, and we were getting into all this kind of stuff, the black projects, the research. They've been looking into this stuff for decades and decades and decades, the power of the mind. And I think when they first discovered all this stuff, there was a real whitewash campaign to try and to discredit it all before it even got out there. And I think with the alien stuff now, we've got to a point where it's so divisive with predictive programming. We've got your Project Bluebeam in one hand, you've got the predictive programming that led up to it with your Independence Day and all the rest of it. And as they say, people say, no, that's nonsense, that's sci-fi movie stuff. But most of that stuff's the truth hidden in plain sight, which is a very
Yeah.
a tactic that they've used to kind of confuse us.
Yeah, I mean, the policy of dealing with UFOs goes back to the beginning of the modern UFO era in 1947, where Admiral Roscoe Hillencutter, first head of the CIA, actually had sent a memo saying to his colleagues that a tactic of official ridicule and denial must be employed. Indeed, this was ratified in 1953 at the Robertson Panel, which was the first organization to use the term UFO, unidentified flying object, when that was first coined. They're basically the same thing. And this is where you get like the way that it's portrayed in the news as a novelty story when all the serious stuff is over, where they play the X-Files music in the background and the newsreader he's sitting there reading about it, and some idiot above the frame dangles a toy flying saucer on a string around his head. Everyone in the studio has a laugh and said, okay. And here's Jenny with the weather. You know, that sort of thing.
That's though, isn't it? What I've noticed is that when I was doing, you know, a bit of research and looking into it, I think it was like Brazil. There's no hiding anything. If something comes about, it's just straight on media, straight on the news. Am I right? Is it Brazil I'm thinking about?
I must say, other countries have a much more healthy attitude. Now, for example, in Mexico, they got a guy called Jaime Maussan.
I think of Mexico, actually.
He is well, Brazil as well, but Mexico has a very different attitude. Maybe it's because it's not English speaking. It's maybe connected primarily in the English speaking countries, but they have like a guy called Jaime Maussan, who's like an official ufological journalist, who's kind of like a big celebrity in Mexico. There's no one outside I know of. I mean, there's a guy called Haktan Aktagan in Turkey who has the same kind of status. There's no one in United States, Canada, Ireland, UK, Australia, and other places where English is the primary language, where that actually takes place. They have that kind of person. So, I mean, obviously, this is not, they don't have complete control. I'm saying the media is not completely and utterly occupied and controlled by the forces that want to keep secrets. Obviously, they have a presence. You mentioned the film Independence Day. Now, it's not a film I enjoyed. It's not a film I thought was particularly good. In fact, quite the opposite. I thought it was a really lousy film. But it's interesting to watch. It's very interesting to watch because it presents a very kind of blunt and monolithic image of extraterrestrials. It's a very crude alien invasion movie where the aliens are. It's almost childlike in its.
It is, isn't it? It's a bit of a mockery,
yeah.
I think, to be fair.
But it presents it's very a high budget film. Its advertising and marketing budget was enormous, as it is for all Roland Emmerich's films. I mean, they really, very well promoted. It was hyped up beyond all belief, which is why when I saw it, my first thought was very disappointment because it didn't live up to the expectations. But it does give out message to a very deep in a very deep emotional way. It appeals to our. In a sense, the deepest parts of our psychology, our emotional response, our reflexes, rather than the rational side of our minds, where we get to think things over. A lot of propaganda is like that. Propaganda of all kinds is designed to bypass our rational mind and go straight for our emotional reactions. And Independence Day does that in an enormous sense. It's as a film, it does. Obviously, though, there are other films that present a very, very different image. I mean, like, I was watching the Project Blue Book drama series.
I've not seen that one yet, although I've been, my friend Cy Blick pointed that one out to me, so I will check it out when I've got the chance.
It's an astonishing production. It's like a drama series that came out just a few months ago. And it tells the story of Project Blue Book. They actually the official government investigation, U.S. government investigation to UFOs. This ran from 1952 to 1969. It was the biggest single UFO investigation operation. The guy running it, a guy called J. Allen Hynek, during the course of his time with Project Blue Book, he became to realize it was just part of the cover-up. It's just another part of the cover-up. And by the time he finished it, he was pretty much, he was quite radicalized, actually, because he ended it as a skeptic, expecting to, waste a couple of years, chasing down kites and strange birds and things like that people thought were aliens. And he came out of it a true believer. And he would not only that, but he said that his role was to promote falsehoods. And he got frustrated with that. He got fed up with it. In the end, he spoke out against it.
It's a very common thread, that one, Ben. So I had a friend who, it's a bit of a risque subject, this one, because it does cause a lot of division, but the hoax, the Holocaust, and I can't profess to know a great deal about it, but what I can say is questions need to be asked. You do need to look into it a bit more, not you, obviously, personally, I mean, just generally. And my friend was told by another friend that he stayed in a B&B with this couple, and they put the idea to him that the Holocaust is not as we've been taught, and he was outraged, obviously, because what we were taught in school is obviously fact and gospel. But he said, "Give me the information. What you need to do is you need to find out what information they're coming with, and we'll discredit it, we'll disprove it." And then he started looking, and the more he looked, the more he realized, oh, hang on a minute, there might be something to this. And now he's kind of completely convinced. He's done a fair bit of ground research into it, and I think it's the same with any of these things. You can go into it with a kind of preconception. But if you go into it with an open mind, the information is there, which leads me nicely to, obviously, you're very keen into the UFO field. What can you tell us about the understanding or the ideas or the theories, because we don't have much information about it, behind the secret space program or the breakaway civilizations that people talk about?
Well, it's the secret space program, I think, is real. I mean, the secret space program is what it says. It's in the name. It is a space program that has existed, which has been developed behind the official space program. The official space program, of course, being the building rockets to fly to space with the Sputnik rocket, and eventually the Apollo program, landing people on the moon, things like that, sending probes to Mars, building space stations to orbit the Earth. We all know about that. We go up and you see the rockets going up all the time. There's Tim Peake and other people who've been set up down on a rocket from the Soyuz rockets. But at the same time, there's been other, the attempt to conquer space has moved into other areas which have been black budget. In other words, they've been completely secret. And these often, it appears, these, from what we hear from insiders, that these are far more successful and they achieved far more than the public space program. There's a guy called Andrew Johnson who's actually studied this in enormous detail. I do recommend his work. He's written a book called Finding the Secret Space Program. But for example, they've been developing craft which are not rockets, but actually manipulate gravity as their propulsion systems. So, and then now this changes everything. A rocket is a huge controlled explosion which literally blasts something into orbit to achieve escape velocity and get it into orbit. It takes a vast amount of fuel, and he's extremely dangerous. I mean, a lot of them just blow up on the launch pad and kill people. A lot of people have been killed in rocket accidents. The Challenger disaster, for example, the space shuttle that exploded shortly after launch. Now, the reason they have to do that is because they have to overcome the force of gravity, which is tremendous. Something has to travel at 17,000 miles per hour, as calculated by Isaac Newton, a famous physicist. And that's just to get into orbit. And then once you're there, getting other places, it doubles or even squares the complexity and difficulty of the mission. Now, if you could control gravity, you have the keys to the universe, because all the problems which come from space travel, it comes from that, the necessity to overcome the force of gravity, especially getting off the Earth in the first place. And if you can get something that can cancel out gravity, for example, you can drive as simply as driving a car. You can get up into orbit. I mean, you could fly upwards at the speed of a normal aircraft. You'll be in space within an hour. No, you'll be in space. And then once you're
in this stuff with the I forget the name. It begins with V. Vermisner wheels or
Vimana.
Vimana, thank you. Yes. Apparently, that's what we call them Nazis. They're not Nazis, I don't think. But anyway, that's an aside. The Hitler and his boys were apparently working with all this stuff, and the Vril and all the rest of it. I've read all about that. But this stuff about mercury, they were told mercury's poison and all the rest of it. Perhaps it is. Who knows? Perhaps it's not. But this is the key, I believe. Is this what you found as well, then?
Yes, definitely. I mean, the Vimanas actually came from India. I mean, there is some stories about these craft, and some of the oldest texts that ever been written that have survived to the modern day. That is the Vedas, the ancient texts of India, which describe craft which involve. I mean, these craft are described in quite detail. They're not extraterrestrial. They are essentially powered by mercury. Now, the use of mercury is interesting because there's a guy called Ed Fouché who talked about he was developing craft powered by mercury, which involved manipulation of gravity. Now, what happened was that during the Nazi period of Germany, there was a huge leap forward of development along this area, and indeed, there's a guy called SS General Hans Kammler who was involved in a project to build what they called the Bell or the Beehive. It was called that, the Beehive, because of the noise it made, and it was essentially definitely an anti-gravity craft, and it used mercury. And what's happened was, at the end of they were actually developing these, and they went to the in the time when they were occupying what was then Czechoslovakia, which is now the Czech Republic. They were actually operating a project at the Skoda plant in Prague. Don't ever laugh at those cars again, because this company was actually, well, I don't think they had any choice in the matter. They were told to, but they were developing these things called the Haunebu spacecraft. Now these look like flying saucers. You see, so there are a few surviving photographs. They look like flying saucers, and they were being powered by this real energy, this anti-gravity. I mean, it's hard to say exactly what was going on, because what happened was the Allies, of course, marched into Germany, and they just stole everything. They took everything. Everything was of use. They took everything that wasn't. They just destroyed. And this includes the personnel. Kammler disappeared. No one knows where he went. Several other of these scientists disappeared, and then no one knows where they went. But we know there was something called Operation Paperclip, which was basically the recruitment of Nazi scientists to work in the Allied countries after the war. Some of them went to Britain. We got a couple of them. The Soviet Union got some of them, but the lion's share was taken by the United States. And some of them are public, like Werner von Braun, the man who developed the rocket, the Apollo moon rockets. These were actually an adaptation of a design he used to build missiles, ballistic missiles, to fire against London during the war. And he basically had his war record completely wiped, and he was given a new start. He was given immunity from prosecution, and he sort of began a new life in the United States, where many others were just sent to Nuremberg and were hanged. But there were many others, I think, that ended up. I mean, there's a lot of reports about this, and about people who've even been named as these vanished scientists who were basically operating under false identities in other countries, especially the United States after the war. And they were actually, I think they were used, possibly, these were some of the people, maybe even Kammler himself, to develop anti-gravity craft for these other countries. And indeed, there was a crash of an object in a place called Kecksburg in 1965. And the description of it, I mean, people say this is like a UFO, these are aliens come down. It's like another Roswell, where an alien craft crashes and it's salvaged by the government. But the descriptions of the of the actual object makes me think more that it's like the Beehive or the Bell, and this is actually the based on the original Nazi design that has been developed in the United States. Because, I mean, it was completely secret. I mean, they sealed off the area. They brought in a flatbed truck. They put a tarpaulin over it and they dragged it away. And anyone who came to have a look, the police were there pushing them away. So the question you got to ask yourself is, I mean, where has that technology gone now? I mean, it's inconceivable that they would have this technology and not use it. My guess is they've gone to the moon, they've gone to Mars. They may well have gone to Mars as early and the moon as early as the 1930s. There may be base. I mean, people talk about this. People come back saying, I worked on a base on Mars. I was on a secret base on Mars, and a lot of them get laughed at, and some of them deserve to be laughed at, but not all of them. It's perfectly plausible that there are manned missions to the various planets, even beyond, in the secret space program. So hopefully this will all come out and we'll know about it soon. I'd love to take a holiday to the moon.
Well, this is it. There's so much information out there, and it is hard to know what's what. But you see, if you look into it all, you do find the golden nuggets, and you think, hang on a minute, there's a bit more to this. And so obviously, and I think it'd be fair to say, and this is not something I tend to dwell on, but the whole issue of flat Earth, been such a divisive issue. But I'm guessing that you're not a subscriber to that camp.
No.
I don't subscribe to either camp, I must say, but it seems from what you're saying that you've got, from your research and understanding, that the likelihood is that we've probably kind of ventured out, and there may well be stuff going on out there that's all just kept under wraps, and what we're being shown now is all just kind of Hollywood studio fakery nonsense, just to keep us all distracted from what they're actually really doing.
I mean, personally, I am a fully blown globalist. I'm a roundhead, but
roundhead in the house.
I don't mind if someone was a flat flat Earth. I don't mind. I've interviewed some of them on my show actually because I've done radio shows covering this subject. But I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I mean the amount of false information that's been spread by the government almost knows no bounds. I mean, I do personally think the Earth is a sphere, and it's in space, and space is real. But there's a lot of secrets in space, a lot of lies we're told about space. This is not one of them, but there's a lot of lies about the nature of the Earth, its age, its origins, and things like that. I mean, for example, as I said, I think it's as likely that people going to the moon and Mars long before they've been done in history. But I mean, the Apollo program itself, which claims to have sent rockets to the moon to land on the moon, I don't believe that's the case. I think there's many reasons to doubt it. I've been talking to a guy called Marcus Allen, who's been researching this. I think it was faked, quite frankly. Why they did it at that time, maybe it's to do with Cold War politics, maybe it's something, you know, it was necessary to have like the space race continue rather than the Russians just winning everything. So the Americans had to come back, to be seen to come back into it.
Again, it's also a nice little distraction, Ben, isn't it?
Mm.
Even though it was decades ago, they knew what they were doing then with regards to, well, later on down the line when more tech becomes more available and there's more information out there, this is all just going to cause division. And that's basically what it's served to do, isn't it? I just personally, I keep an open mind to everything. You know, I question everything, but I also keep an open mind. The minute you start saying, well, this can't be true, or that can't be true, or this isn't happening, that, you know, you just put yourself in a bit of a box, I think. So it's just best to be open to all of it and let it simmer and see what you think.
Definitely. I mean, if I say something's not real, it's because I've looked into it myself, and I think, I mean, for example, my idea of the Earth being round is based on my own observations and from my own investigations. I certainly wouldn't just believe it because someone told me. Definitely not.
Yeah.
I think that's the best thing to do. Yeah.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate that. And what I've been mentioning is the two threads that I have in my head, which is essentially we've got two different kind of narratives. The one is kind of nuts and bolts ships leaving the Earth, finding other planets, finding other races, going off into the cosmos and perhaps finding other star systems. And we've also got the kind of interdimensional aspect of it where, you know, it's said through quantum physics and all the rest of it that we're all existing within a kind of space time continuum, and we're only be able to perceive a really small percentage of it, but then by altering the brain as a receiver, we're able to tune into other kind of dimensions and which are coexisting at the same time within our own kind of space. Have you any kind of thoughts on that kind of, Ben, or do you have any experiences even through kind of interdimensional stuff?
I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, the universe, I mean, serious scientists are saying that the universe as we see it is actually not the only thing that's there. It's a part of what's there, what they call the multiverse, which involves other parallel universes are a part of that. And it may be possible it's in certain states of consciousness for us to just perceive areas beyond what we can normally see, what we can normally perceive. I mean, this could certainly, I think, this has an enormous bearing on paranormal research. I have actually had strange experiences where I have been in an altered state of consciousness. Now, I don't take any mind-altering substances. I know some people do. People like Graham Hancock have written considerably about this, and it's very interesting. Rick Strassman and people like that, and I'm very interested in that kind of field. It's not something I've looked into. I don't feel the urge to have those experiences personally, but I have, for example, been in a half asleep state, and I see strange things. I mean, one
hypnagogic state, as they call it, the hypnagogic state.
Yes,
a lot of them go on in that kind of between state, I think is.
Yes, where you're between waking and sleeping. You can often have some strange experiences. I mean, I suffer from sleep paralysis, which I get quite regularly.
Oh, okay.
And sometimes I see strange things in my visions. For example, hooded figures, strange creatures. Just the other day, actually, I had this is quite rare. I've only had like about maybe a handful of these experiences during my sleep paralysis. Normally, things just look normal, but I seen like a strange being sort of standing over my bed, looking at me, and a creased, elderly, sort of like almost gnome-like face, mouth moving as if speaking. It was very, very odd. That's quite alarming, actually. I mean, I didn't panic because these things have happened before. I mean, I know what it is. It's sleep paralysis. Yeah. But if it happened to me for the first time, I'd be terrified. I would.
Yeah, I bet. I had a bit of sleep paralysis the other night, and I think it was if I'd been able to harness the experience, I think it was the launch pad to get astral or go out of body. Have you ever had those experiences as a result of sleep paralysis, or have you always just been stuck in the paralysis state?
I've always been stuck in the paralysis state. What happens is now when it happens, I just like lie there, and eventually it wears off, and I wake up. But I know some people. There's a guy called Robert Monroe, who could actually induce out-of-body experiences. He found a way to induce out-of-body experiences because he had that kind of mind, and he studied it in a very scientific manner, and he did some really highly correct scientific research into it, and he founded the Robert Monroe Institute. He's written a couple of really good books, and he did experiments. For example, he'd have somebody put something like, I'll put something on the top shelf where I can't see it, and I'll go look at it when I'm out of body. And these produced positive results. I mean, the skeptics deny this, but they did produce positive results, and they've been repeated. It's happened many times. This was actually part of what Hal Puthoff was doing with Uri Geller and Ingo Swann and these other guys that he recruited to the CIA to be part of a mind control operation, of a remote viewing operation. Again, the reason the skeptics got, I mean, one of the people involved was someone called Bill Nye. Now he's one of the guys. Sorry, Bill Nye, the science guy. Yeah, he's I think that's the one. Yeah, he goes on TV to say, oh, there's no such thing as remote viewing. These experiments all failed. But the reason is because he was involved in them, and they went black budget. They went secret. Right. So he basically needed to cover the trail, and this is how he does it. So yeah, Robert Monroe achieved enormous things that way. I myself had I suppose it was an inadvertent proof I got, but I saw my partner at the time. I saw her father on a train once when I was in a half asleep state. I didn't know what he looked like, but I described him to her when I saw her next, and she showed me a photograph of him, and I think it was the man I saw. I'm pretty sure it was the man I saw. That was very creepy. I hadn't seen that photograph, you see. I hadn't seen that. I couldn't have imagined that because I hadn't seen the photo. Things like that.
These are the unexplained experiences. I think they're kind of like crumbs from the creator, however you want to call it. Just little kind of nods to let you know there's more to all this, and kind of you're on the right path and keep doing what you're doing, you know?
Yeah, definitely. It's an interesting, this work exists. This knowledge has been collected. It's denied officially, but it is real. So yeah, I believe our minds can perceive other things. For example, like near-death experience as well, which is something else I'm very interested in. That you have the ability. In a sense, this is something. It's quite a new phenomenon. It only really dates back a couple of decades when we had the ability to bring people back from a near-death state using resuscitation technology, defibrillators to restart the heart, various medications and drugs they can give you to actually bring you out of comas and the point where you're about to die. And people describe they go down a tunnel, they see another world, which is one they're told. Sometimes they meet people, including people they know who have already died, and they're told, well, this is where you go when you die. This is what happens to you when you die. You come here. You come at the wrong time. You can go back. You're going to have the chance to go back because you're being resuscitated. But when you go, this is where you'll come. Now, again, the skeptics say this is some kind of delusion, but I don't buy it. There's a lot of research being done into this, which leads me to believe that it was objectively real. People from all over the world have the same experiences.
This is it.
It's the same with aliens and the same with the sleep paralysis. No matter where you go in the world, you'll meet people with enormous variations in culture, race, religion, etc. Yet they all report the same images. Even people who may have never seen a movie will report the aliens that we see in movies. So that puts, that's completely dismisses it and reduces the idea. The skeptics say, well, people only started seeing aliens when they started putting aliens in the movies. Not true.
Not true.
And indeed, the same goes for near-death experiences and that. Again, wherever you go, people have the same experiences.
I think a lot of it goes the other way as well, Ben, with regards to, I was reading about, I think it was, and again, timelines and history, we know it's all up for questioning, but it was to do with the Greeks using some kind of psychedelic, the hoi polloi, the aristocracy were using these psychedelics, and that was around the same time that kind of clowns and carnival kind of artwork and stuff started appearing, and you think, well, perhaps it's the other way around, that people are experiencing these things and then writing and talking about them, much like the cave paintings, and Graham Hancock says when the humans at the time were using perhaps psychedelic mushrooms and then drawing chimeras, half horse, half man, and all these kind of things. Very interesting. I think a lot of people think that mainstream culture and pop culture comes or thoughts rather come from pop culture, but I think it's the other way around. I think they feed it to us with all this predictive programming and all the rest of it.
definitely. I mean, the Greek situation I'm referring to is like the oracles. Now, the oracles were people. They were women actually used to swim in these ponds in a cave. And there was the oracle of Dordona and the oracle of Delphi and places like that. And people used to go along and listen to them. Now, it's interesting that the people were given a drink, a ritual drink, as part of the ceremony. It's odd because the drink, what it was called, it was known as soma, I think.
Soma, yeah.
And it was based on one of the ingredients was rye, which
That's
is
right, yeah.
But now rye is where you get the ergot fungus. Now, ergot is toxic, but it could be the toxic side. The toxic ingredients can be removed, and there's a ingredient left which was synthesized as LSD. Now, these people were drinking long before LSD was discovered by Albert Hoffman. These people in Dordona and Delphi, they may well have been drinking LSD inadvertently, but they were having these remarkable experiences. And as you said, the clowns, these clowns that don't actually appear. They appear somewhere time of the Roman Empire, I think, or they appeared first then. And you've got to ask yourself where they came from, because the people who Rick Strassman's volunteers for his experiment also saw clowns.
Yeah.
Which is very odd. And the same thing occurs with aliens. For example, Bill Nye, the science guy, will tell you, and he's actually said this, and Philip Klass said this, that the little grey aliens, the classic grey aliens, didn't exist before 1977. The reason is that's when Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the great UFO movie, was released, and they had these little grey aliens wandering around. And that's where people got the idea, and either consciously or subconsciously, they took these images and put them into their fantasies. Thing is, that's not true. And there's a guy called Robbie Graham who studied this. He actually managed to get hold of the production designer for that movie, because he wanted to investigate this. And he said to him, "These little grey aliens you see in this film, right, where did you get that idea from?" Because they got like the tall grey and the short grey in that movie. And he said, "Oh, it's very simple. I phoned up some of the people who see them. I phoned up one of the people who gets abducted by them. I phoned a couple of them up, and they told me what they look like. And I talked to them for a while. I based my design on that." So Nye's essentially put the cart before the horse, either deliberately or inadvertently. He's put the cart before the horse there. Exactly as you said, it's art imitating life, not life imitating art.
That's right, yeah. Thank you for putting it that way. That's what I was trying to think of. Yeah, I've had first-hand, or the second-hand would be the fair description, the experience of people having entity contact on DMT. And you know, you mentioned Rick Strassman there, and that was what me got into the kind of field of research in DMT. And you know, obviously these experiences are subjective; they are the person's own experience. But when you're actually with them and they're telling you what they've experienced, you know, it's as real, if not more real, than reality to them. So yeah, as you say, it's art imitating life, I think, which leads us on nicely. What I wanted to ask you about, Ben, if I may, is your understanding of mind control technology, black projects, all this kind of stuff, targeted individuals, gang stalking, the whole arena, if I may push you on that one, and just to share what you know, really, and what you found through your research looking into these things.
Well, yeah, I kind of already gone into that through my own experiences with Isabel.
Yes,
Isabel Menzies
yeah.
live.
Yeah.
That's a part of the kind of thing we're talking about. It's actually, there's a lot of people in that situation who are subjected to mind control in various ways, and a lot of them are people who are psychiatric patients who are put into, often without consent, into various kinds of experiments involving drugs. Some of them are military personnel or people in other forms of government service who are put into, who for some reason are either tricked or they agree with a large cash bonus to take part in various experiments. And that's the mind control is a real thing. I mean, it goes, obviously, mind control could be anything that influences the way you think and feel. So it could be a propaganda poster or something like that. But the ability to actually change people's thoughts directly exists. And MK Ultra was very interesting because it used all kinds of techniques, including the use of various drugs, to alter the personalities and alter the behavior of various peoples. Now, MK Ultra was officially discontinued. It officially stopped in 1969, but of course mind control still continued in various forms or another. And most disturbing of all, there's actually a video you can get on YouTube, which was a 10-year reunion of the MK Ultra team. And this was in 1979, and it was videoed. Someone filmed it. Timothy Leary is there. Now, Timothy Leary is kind of he was a hero of the New Age drug culture movement.
Your counterculture hero, right?
Yeah. He actually was the guy who coined the phrase turn on, tune in, drop out, who was encouraging like massive drug use, things like that, and various alternative lifestyles. That to me sounds very similar to what I said earlier about the Tavistock Institute infiltrating the Occupy London camp, getting in there and using it as in a sense, a controlled opposition to make sure it sounds alternative. People get into it looking for something alternative, but it's not really alternative. It's just a way of leading your own opposition. And so that's one of the things to do with MK Ultra. I mean, the interesting thing about MK Ultra is that they said that they could actually produce some kind of almost a human robot. And indeed, there's a film about this. Now, this was interesting because it's based on the real stories of prisoners of war who returned at the end of the Korean War. And they were, oddly enough, they completely changed. They'd become supporters of their enemy from their time in prisoner of war camps. It turns out they'd been subjected to torture and things like that and beatings, but they'd also been given various kinds of drugs. And rather than just thinking that's an awful thing, look after these guys, hope you can make it better, it seems that the United States, they'd kind of jumped on board with that particular project and thought they'd try it themselves. And indeed, this is where LSD was first used in experimental forms, in experimental mind control forms. There's a guy called Neil Sanders he's a lot more expert than myself in this because he studied it in detail. And he's written a book called Your Thoughts Are Not Your Own. And he's sort of looked into this in more detail than I have, and he has more knowledge on the subject. But funnily enough, there's a film came out called The Manchurian Candidate.
Yeah.
A very interesting movie. It was actually due to be released in November of 1963. But in November of 1963...
Oh, I didn't realize the original was so far back. Yeah, I didn't know that.
I mean, there's been a remake. It's not terribly good. But the original has Angela Lansbury in it and Frank Sinatra and people like that. It was originally released in November 1963, but that's when the Kennedy assassination happened, and for whatever reason, it was delayed for a few months. It was released a few months later because maybe they didn't want people asking too many questions. Because the film is about a guy who comes back from the Korean War, and he appears normal, but it turns out that he actually has been he's had his mind altered, and he's been controlled by his own mother, who was like his handler. And she just has to say a few words to him, and he transforms instantly into a robot, and he's programmed to kill. And his mission is to kill a presidential candidate in an election. And that was the reason that was delayed was because then the Kennedy assassination happened, and Lee Harvey Oswald, the guy who supposedly did it, doesn't remember doing it. He says, I didn't do this. And because he shot the following 2 days later by a guy called Jack Ruby, who then dies in prison. And then just 5 years later, a man who'd not formally run for US president was going to, that is Bobby Kennedy, John F. Kennedy's brother, was shot by a guy called Sirhan. He was shot in a hotel kitchen. And Sirhan denies, he says he has no memory of doing it. He still denies it. He's an old man now. He's still in jail. And to this day, he denies, he fervently protests his innocence. And so it makes you wonder how much is being told in these books. I mean, the book's by a guy called Richard Condon, who I think is some relative of the guy who did Sir Robert, not his name, General Robert Condon, the guy behind the Condon Committee into UFOs. I think they're sort of related in some way. I can't remember, but the guy who wrote the book, The Manchurian Candidate, is related in some way. So it makes you wonder what they're trying to. Maybe they're trying to get some message out in a very subtle way to try and inform people what's really going on. They can't say it openly, because then everyone would say, "Oh, they're just conspiracy theorists, take no notice of them." They did it in allegorical novel form, and it's a good way of getting information out to do it in allegorical fiction, which is why I wrote this.
That's very much what Justin is doing with his book, all science fiction, but as all his research and all his truth. And I think sometimes it's giving away, isn't it?
I'm curious to read it. We're curious to read his stuff.
I like Justin. He's a lovely chap.
Oh, great. Yeah. I'm curious to read what you say, because I love that kind of fiction. George Orwell, of course, is the classic one with 1984.
Yeah.
I mean,
have you read any Peter F. Hamilton?
Who?
Peter F. Hamilton, the UK's #1 sci-fi author.
Yeah, I've heard of him. Yeah.
Yeah, he's really busy at the moment. He's got a book launch on the go for his latest book. But I read all his other books in prison, and
Scottish guy, isn't he?
I'm not entirely sure if he's Scottish. He might be, might not be. But yeah, just so visionary. I want to ask him, are you another one of these Aldous Huxley, George Orwell type characters? Yeah. But in this day, that's my tinfoil hat side of me. But in reality, these days, it's all out there, Ben. Research papers, patents, and all the rest of it. It just takes that creative mind to put it all together. But absolutely wonderful author. His vision is like we've mastered faster than light technology, conquered like 6-star systems, or very, very, very futuristic. But fantastic! So I'm really looking forward to speaking with him. Yeah.
Because, great! You got him on the show. That's fantastic. I mean, I've not read any of his books, but I mean, I love sci-fi, and I'm sure if he's the kind of person you'd like to want to speak to, and he's like myself, I'm sure I'd like his work because I mean, like, it is allegorical fiction is a wonderful way of getting information out. It could bypass the usual nonsense. Yeah. Male cow excrement that the skeptics throw at us and things like that. You say, relax, guys, it's just a story.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, Aldous Huxley is another example. Aldous Huxley's book, Brave New World. I mean, read 1984 and Brave New World, and you have like the future of the 20th century right there in front of you.
I know, it's just bizarre. And
Brave New World, genetically engineering. It's about genetic engineering, artificial life, transhumanism.
Yeah.
And it's written in 1930, years ahead of its time. And Aldous Huxley, interestingly, was George Orwell's school teacher.
I didn't know that.
Incredible. I mean, when I found out, I thought it kind of made sense. I love it fly on the wall during their conversations after class.
Imagine, right? I know, yeah. And this is it, we know that, again, we come back to the whole predictive programming and all the stuff. And, 1984, I looked around and you see the smartphones, the smart TV up on the wall, lifetime recording. And it's just like, yeah, okay, this is it. It's upon us. Us. But it seems to be, Ben, that we're also a kind of a really good place. There's some real, I'll just say it, fuckeries going on around the world. But there's also some real good stuff going on as well. And this is what I like. We're just bringing it all out on the table, getting everyone together, and hopefully we can just get some unity on the go and kind of just start kind of pushing things to where we really want them to be, because nobody really wants things the way they are right now, do we? Yeah. It seems to be a small minority kind of leading us all down the garden path, but we are waking up quickly, and it's been really, really nice to chat to you, but I really appreciate it. Have you got did you want to round back off to anything, or did you want to mention any talks you might have coming up or any of the stuff going on?
Well, I'm not booked for any talks at the moment, but I'm available if anyone wants to book me for an event. I don't charge a fee. I mean, if someone can just pay for my travel and give me a place to stay for the night, and a place to stay could be on someone's settee or a mattress on the floor or something, But I do live shows of various kinds on various subjects, and of course, do buy my book, Roswell Rising: A Novel of Disclosure, and it's the two others books in the Roswell trilogy, and check me out, Hospital Porters Against the New World Order, Hapanwo. There's the blogs, there's the YouTube channel, radio show. Like yourself, I interview people and things like that, and so do check that out. I've got Stephen Bassett on Hapanwo Radio this Thursday. Now he's a top exopolitician, a man advocating for disclosure of UFOs, so do check that out.
Oh, I will do. Thank you, brother. And I'll be sure to put all the links in the description box for you. So, everyone can catch up and check it with you. But I really appreciate your time tonight, brother. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We'll catch up again real soon.
Thank you.
Take care, brother. All the best.
Bye-bye.